leading Britain's conversation with Nigel Farage.
Yes, if you're just tuning in, it's Nigel Farage. I'm standing in for Ian Dale this week, and I'll be here with you not just today until 7, but also tomorrow from 4 till 7. And then next week I'll be back to my normal times on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday evenings of 7 till 8. Plus, starting from this Sunday, I'll be with you every Sunday from 10 until 12 in what is a new departure for me and for LBC. Now, online gambling firm 888 are being made by the regulator to pay a record penalty of £7.8 million after it failed to protect vulnerable customers. The Gambling Commission said there were significant flaws in the firm's social responsibility policy. 7,000 customers who'd asked to bar themselves from their online 888 accounts were still able to gamble. Another customer, perhaps the worst case here, had lost £1.3 million over the last 13 months, including money he'd stolen from his company. And I wonder, ultimately, whether it's a gambling house, whether it's online poker, whether it's going into a betting shop and those new gaming machines, or indeed whether it's a pub or a wine bar that's selling alcohol to somebody to whom it's clearly doing great harm, or the local cigarette shop, or whatever it may be. These are private companies. Their motivation is to make profit. They're told they have to engage in corporate social responsibility. But where, folks, do you draw the line between personal and corporate responsibility? At what point does a gambling problem cease to be the problem of the individual and become the problem of the bookmaker or the online gaming organisation? And it's not an easy debate to deal with. I know, I have to confess, I know lots of people don't gamble. Lots of people take a very dim view of gambling. I've been a gambler all my life. I love betting. I love the thrill of betting. I'm an occasional gambler. I'm not an addicted gambler. I do it. I like winning, of course. It doesn't always happen, but I have seen plenty of people in my life, and particularly in my professional life, when I worked for 20 years before this in the metal trading business. I've seen lots of people literally, ruin their lives through their gambling habits and their gambling addiction. So I'm not for one moment pretending that there isn't a problem down here. But what could gambling companies do? What do they need to do to protect their customers from themselves? And I've noticed that actually people can get addicted to gambling really pretty easily. Now, I particularly want to hear from people who work in the gambling industry. If you're in the bookmaking game, the casino game, or whatever it is, call me. Do it anonymously. Tell me, what measures your organisation has in place to try and protect people from themselves. But ultimately, is it really your responsibility? Or is it the responsibility of the person who's coming in, gambling, or buying that drink, or buying those cigarettes? And I think it's a world in which we are increasingly trying to put the pressure on those private companies. At the end of the day, I think the emphasis lies more with the individual than it does with the company. That's my view. I wonder what Michael in Bournemouth makes of this debate. Michael, hello, good evening.
Hi there, Nigel. Just want to say thank you for your show, great show, and it's really great that you're going to be on Sunday mornings.
Thank you.
That's good. My thing is, I left school and I was a little bit of a gambler. I lost a couple of grand and then I realised it was getting too much.
Yeah.
Luckily, I did have support around me and I just, friends and family just helped me. But my argument is that it is down to the individual, because these 7,500 people who they did kind of self-exclude themselves, they would have just gone to another betting shop or another online gambling site. So, it's a bit like someone who smokes. They're always going to find money for cigarettes. It's the same thing. They will always find a betting shop.
Yeah, actually, the accessibility to gambling has changed hugely since the growth of the internet, hasn't it? That's the real truth. Is that before, you had to trudge down to the bookmakers, and perhaps they'd be open till 7 or 8 p.m. in the evening. But now, you can play online poker at 4 in the morning.
Yeah. it's crazy, and I don't know if maybe the government, a bit like the DBLA, that if you get banned from driving, you know, it's in every county, it's in every city, there's one central database. I don't know why the gambling companies and the sites can't work together to make one central system.
I think the problem with that, and as I say, I'm hoping we're going to get people from the gambling industry, ringing in and talking to us about this. But I think, Michael, my observation of this is that so many of the gambling sites, the poker sites, whatever it may be, aren't actually UK domiciled anyway.
Right, okay, so they wouldn't want to be under our law.
So, this is not an easy problem. But you feel, ultimately, it was your fault that you were losing a load of money, not the fault of the bookmakers or the online casino or whatever else it may be.
No, yes, you do sometimes have 2 or 3 of the same companies, even on the same high street, but you also have the same 2 or 3 fast food joints. And if it's you who is going in there ordering a burger, if you want to use that analogy, they're not going to stop you. So at the end of the day, you've got to sort it out. And I think there are quite a lot of websites and help groups for people who feel they have a problem, but a lot of the time they don't want to. They know they've got a problem, but like you say, you enjoy a bit of a flutter, and you don't want to stop.
No, I do, and it's never. I've had 1 or 2. Hits that have hurt a little bit, but generally I don't bet in that way. I bet because I enjoy it. I bet occasionally. I'm not compulsive. But I wonder whether, are there very vulnerable people out there who are prone to adverts that come up on their mobile phone or wherever it may be?
There are, and these things where you see, like, give us £100 and we'll match you with a welcome bonus and all that sort of thing. Yeah. I don't think these help, and they do need more responsibility on those types of things. But at the end of the day, they are a business, and like anything else, they make money, and they entice you. It's like saying, fast food companies shouldn't really advertise on TV because it's bad food, the calories. But
they do, and they do it everywhere, don't they? Yeah. Yeah. Michael, listen, interesting to hear your experience, and pleased to hear that you're through your problem. Now, Kate here, who has texted me on 84850, has a very strong opinion. Hi, Nigel. My son owes £46,000 in gambling debts. He will never be able to pay it back. I despise gambling firms, especially when they advertise during football games on TV. Wow, Kate, that's a hard, punchy message. And even though I'm somebody that thinks it's the responsibility of the individual more than the private company, I do take your point. I think that the way that gambling products are advertised on television is done incredibly cleverly, and there is this kind of impression that for a first-time punter, you can really get something for nothing. And perhaps, just perhaps, Kate, we do need to look at the way in which these things are advertised. But Kate, it's not just on TV during football. Gambling adverts pop up on my smartphone every single week. Now, Kevin, who's from Fife in Scotland, I understand has a background in bookmaking. Kevin, good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm very well, Kevin. I'm just trying to work out what the responsible balance is here between the gambler with a problem and the shop, the bookmaker, the online company running a business.
For me personally, I think I agree with you that it's down to the individual, first of all. But, I worked in a betting shop for 7 years, and in that time, the approach changed massively. And I know your previous caller had mentioned about having a database with everybody that's sort of self-excluded from one place to another.
Yeah.
Now, it was something that I do, as I was leaving, they were trying to implement if somebody had sort of self-excluded from one bookmakers, that they would be self-excluded from all the local ones. But in reality, it's very difficult to sort of enforce that because people provide a sort of small passport photo, and the staff are supposed to rely on that for to identify them. But at the end of the day, if somebody wants to gamble, they will.
Yes.
They'll find a way to gamble.
Yes, I do understand that, although there is a lot more availability to gamble, isn't there? I mean, I walk down high streets, and all I see now are coffee shops, pound stores, or betting shops. I mean,
exactly, yeah.
Is there anything else in most of the high streets? I'm not sure there is.
No, I think the interesting thing, there's some streets, especially around London, where they have the same bookmakers like on the same street, and it's down to the fact that they're only allowed 4 of the betting terminals in each shop. So they have, if they open a second shop, they're allowed another 4 on that premises. So, and I mean, that's the real moneymaker these days, is the sort of self-service betting machines. So
the betting machines, Kevin, just for those that don't know this game, you know, we think of a bookmaker where somebody goes in and puts a tenner on a horse or 20 quid on a horse or whatever it is, and they either win or they don't. But these betting shops now have these machines in with quite high numbers, yeah?
Yeah, so originally, probably about 2 years ago, you could spend like £100 each time on a roulette machine. So almost every 3 seconds, that was £100.
Wow.
That was recently reduced to £50. And I think there is some sort of groups that are looking to try and lobby government to get that even reduced to £2.
Right.
Which would completely decimate that part of the business. So it's something that I know the bookmakers are sort of fighting back to say that it's not really a problem. The other thing I'd said to sort of the producer there was that I think the industry doesn't help. Although the responsibility is with the individual, I don't think the industry helps a whole lot, because a lot of the high street firms will have staff on after 6 o'clock at night on their own. So if you run into somebody that has a gambling problem or is sort of displaying the signs of a problem, getting very aggressive, it's very difficult for somebody who works on their own to deal with that situation.
But equally, Kevin, that person with a gambling problem getting aggressive, if they weren't in the betting shop, they could be online anyway, couldn't they?
Most likely, and the thing is, I mean, there's probably 5, 6 main high street bookmakers that we know of, but online there's probably thousands and thousands.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And many of them foreign domain, as I was pointing out earlier. Kevin?
Yeah, mainly Gibraltar, I think it is.
Well, I think there are other places too. Kevin, do you, I mean, you know, you've worked in this industry, you can see both sides of the argument. Do you think we need more responsibility from bookmakers, or are they doing it the right way?
I think bookmakers could do more to support staff to help with the issue, but certainly I think the first step for someone with a gambling problem is to, I mean, there's lots of resources for someone to get help with that.
Kevin, terrific. Thank you for that, your insight, your experience. I'm Nigel Farage here on LBC. The time is 6:15. On the day, the online gambling firm 888 is made to pay a record penalty of £7.8 million for failing to protect vulnerable customers, we ask the question, where do you draw the line between personal and corporate responsibility? Is it the fault of the individual? They're losing too much money on the ticket machines, the slot machines, the horses, whatever, poker, whatever it may be? Or does there come a point where really this is the responsibility of the company? And I, as I've said already, I take the view, whether it's, you know, a landlord selling booze to somebody who they know it's doing terrible damage to, or the local cigarette shop selling cigarettes to somebody who's clearly got emphysema, or whether it's people allowing those they know have got no money to come into their betting shops and bet on the 2:30 at Newmarket. Ultimately, it does seem to me that it's the responsibility of the individual. That doesn't mean there shouldn't be good professional standards, but it is, I think, the responsibility of the individual. Hey, Nigel, I gave up online slots in June. There is so much out there. People even donate to watch others gamble online. Gambling live streams are massive. Well, I've got to tell you, whoever you are, I wouldn't pay to watch anybody else gambling online. Hi, Nigel. I spend £60 a month on direct debit on the lottery, £720 a year. Are we going to stop that, says Chris in Leeds. No, Chris in Leeds, we're not going to stop that. But your chances of winning the lottery, I think it's about 14 million to 1. I've never bought a lottery ticket in my life. The reason is I like real betting. I think the chances of winning the lottery are just about zip. Having said that, a waitress I knew in a restaurant I used to frequent did win 5 million. So there you are. It can be done. My situation was so bad, Nigel, that I would get paid monthly at approximately 3 a.m. and come 5 a.m. my bank account would be empty. Gary from Ilford. Gary, it is a sad story, and I know that gambling can be a dreadful addiction. I have seen friends of mine ruined by their gambling habits. But why do I come out on the side of saying that it's more the responsibility of the individual than the company? Because ultimately, if someone's got that gambling addiction, you can ban them from every betting shop in the country. But they'll find somewhere online or round the back of the street corner to bet if they've still got the compulsive desire to do so. It's like alcoholism. It's like many other addictive problems that people have. Nick from Croydon, tell me, is this the company's responsibility or the individual's?
It's the person's, Nigel. I mean, if you're a grown-up, you make grown-up choices. You make grown-up decisions.
Yeah.
And you either do things or don't. No one's forcing you into Ladbrokes or Coral or anyone else. I find it amazing that people want commercial organisations to stop their customers coming and buying their goods and services. It wouldn't happen in any other walk of life. LBC, for example, wouldn't exclude listeners to their shows because they're spending too much time listening to it. Greggs aren't stopping.
Good point. Good point. No, Nick, it's a great point. And Greggs are selling sausage rolls to people that we would say were slightly challenged.
I'm overweight,
Right.
I own up. I'm not flawless, but if you are a grown-up, if you are an adult, if you want to be treated like a grown-up, an adult, then take some personal responsibility. No one's forcing you. What I would like to see happen, and I haven't seen yet, is the betting, the adverts for slots or gaming or whatever, actually showing what the percentage payout is, like fruit machines.
They don't have to do that, no. I mean, Nick, look, I'm with you. I think that it is the responsibility of the individual, though I do accept there are some extreme cases where maybe we need to do something to try and protect people from themselves, although what that is, I don't know. But my observation, Nick, and you know, I know the betting industry, I know a lot of bookmakers, I know a lot of people who've been in this industry, even had a family member that was involved in this industry, so I do know about it, and the one thing I would say, and we had this point earlier made about TV advertising, a lot of the companies, when they do their adverts, they're looking for first-time business. And they're saying to people, have your first bet free, have your first bet, we'll match it and add 50 quid. And I do think that perhaps the gambling industry is allowed to give an impression that you kind of get something for nothing, and maybe those adverts, maybe that, and you can argue, Nick, laissez-faire and a fool and his money are soon parted, but there is, look, let's face it, the company has some responsibility for how it markets its products, and advertising standards and all the rest of it. But ultimately, Nick, I'm with you. If somebody who is grossly overweight goes into Greggs every day and loads up on sausage rolls, they're really nice too, then, actually, it's up to them. Nick from Croydon, I thank you. And Nick also pointing out there could be LBC addicts out there that are listening to LBC, ringing, texting, tweeting and neglecting their work or their family. He may be right, for all I know. Tony in Bounds Green, tell me what you know about gambling.
Well, I know how to lose, Nigel, put it like that.
Right, and that's through bitter experience, Tony, is it?
Not really, no, but a mixed bag. But what I was going to say is I appreciate what you're saying about the gambling industry, but I think there's a whole new strand of this artificial intelligence being applied to gambling sites.
Yes.
And my point would be that if the players' data, the previous betting patterns are being used against them in terms of the way they play, when you let them win to carry on gambling, for example, if all of that data is being manipulated against a gambler, as is quite possible these days, that's a slightly more subtle implication, because you've got a gambling company that will know that if somebody quits every 10 bets if they've lost, but then will play on if they win after 8, then you can actually model their behaviour to stay on the site. And I think there's a big difference between things like boxing or football and man-made games like bingo.
Right.
Where, if you go into a normal casino, the casino table in roulette does not know where everybody's placed their bets as such. The wheel doesn't know. But if you're playing online roulette, the website itself will know the value of each bet on each payout.
Yeah.
And it's almost like playing cards when you're showing the cards to the opposition. So what you can have is a table that pays out some winners. It could even pay out a huge number of small winners, but always make a profit on the table. And I'm quite surprised that I'm slightly dubious if the regulator is deep in the computer code of some of these gambling companies.
So, I mean, I take your point that if we go and play roulette and, there's 36 and there's the naught and the wheel spins and it finishes up pretty much where it finishes up. I totally understand that. But from what you're saying about the way artificial intelligence could be used with online gambling, that would be akin to something criminal, wouldn't it, Tony?
Well, it's an interesting thing because, we've seen investigations in the financial markets, as you're talking about, in terms of algorithmic trading.
Yeah.
But it can be easily applied when you've got games that can be sold individually. When you go on a game and you need to choose a number, that number could be specifically chosen for you in a way that would not apply if you were asking who won Manchester United versus Manchester City.
Yes. Yes.
The potential for manipulation.
Yeah, there is. No, listen, that's an incredibly good point, and I have to confess, not something I'd even thought about before. But yes, you could be luring people, couldn't you, into doing themselves the absolute utmost damage by giving them the odd win with online bingo or whatever it may be. Tony, that's a very, very powerful and very interesting point. Lee from Kensal Rise, are you a gambler?
I have gambled, but I'm not a gambler.
Right, okay.
Listen, I've been a money trader for 30 years.
Right,
okay?
yep.
And it's very easy to get tempted into doing a punt, as we call it, in the city.
Yeah.
Okay? But, if you do a punt, you get it wrong, you lose your job, and you're out of the business. But the reason I phoned was because I maybe I have some advice here for teenagers. Okay?
Right, good.
My son was 16 years old, and I said sooner or later he's going to try it. So we went into a betting shop in France, and I showed him how to hedge, because I'm a professional derivatives trader, and I hedge.
Yep.
Okay, I always know when I'm getting into a trade what my odds are of successful.
Yep.
So we went into the betting shop. I said, "It's time you learn this," and I showed him how to hedge his bets. Okay. And we won. It wasn't much, 10 euros or something like that. But at least, I told him, finally, don't do it, okay? But
here we are, son. We've made money, don't do it. I'm not sure that's very convincing, Lee, really.
Well, he hasn't done it, so the lesson succeeded.
Well, no, that's good. But generally, Lee, maybe there is a point out of this, which is maybe people, before they go into betting shops or sign up for accounts, should pass some sort of degree of minor proficiency test so they can show they understand what they're getting themselves into. That might help a bit, mightn't it?
Yeah, unless you come to me.
Right. Okay, guys, anybody that's got a slight gambling problem, once they put their kids off, Lee from Kensal Rise is the man. Thank you. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm standing in for Ian Dale for the whole of this week. It is now 6:30 and online gambling firm 888 is fined a record penalty, £7.8 million, because what they've done is they've failed to protect vulnerable customers. And I'm asking you, where does the balance lie of responsibility? Is it the individual losing money? Is it the company allowing them to do it? Whose fault is it? What needs to be done? But before we go to that, we go to Henrietta Grimston from 7 Investment Management. Henrietta, good evening.
Good evening.
So I understand we're saving less money, is that right?
Yeah, well, this is less money going into cash ISAs. So this is the allowance you get every year to set some money into an ISA wrapper, which, of course, accumulates tax-free. That's free of income tax and capital gains tax. Now, you can choose to invest inside ISA wrappers, but cash ISAs, as I said, a bank account, are an option. Now, in the last tax year, there was a third of a decline in the amount that actually went into these ISAs. So about £39.2 billion went in versus £58.7 billion for the 2015-16 tax year. Now, there's a couple of factors that are being attributed to this. One is just the interest rates are very low, so obviously lots of us are saying, look, this doesn't look like an attractive option. I have a view on that, which I will share with you in a moment. We're also saving a lot less anyway in terms of household income. It's dropped to 1.7% of our income we're now setting aside in savings, and that's been a trend for the last few years anyway. There's also been the introduction of a tax-free interest rate. You can, if you're a basic rate taxpayer, have £1,000 worth of interest before it's tax-free. So there's a lot of moving parts to this, but one of the things that I always think about from an investment perspective is you're not just looking at what's happening today, you're looking at for the future. So, you can put £20,000 into an ISA in the current tax year. Now, okay, interest rates at the moment might not look attractive, but in years to come, we hope they will go up. And obviously at that point in time, it might have been a very good decision.
It may well have been. No, that's true. And Henrietta, we're debating this hour on LBC gambling companies, particularly online gambling companies, but the high street as well, and whether they bear a responsibility for gamblers who lose huge sums of money. And in line with this, we've had some figures from Ladbrokes today, I understand.
Yeah, I feel slightly bad actually reporting this story. so they've had a really good first half of the year, and they've seen revenues up 1% to £1.2 billion. Big increase in operating profits, up 7%. That's as a result of the merger between Ladbrokes and Coral that took place last year. So they've had quite a big saving in the operating profits. But it's really the online gambling which has done very well for them in the first 6 months of the year, an 18% increase, and of course that includes gambling on the likes of mobile phones as well. So
and that's the way the industry is going, isn't it?
It is, yes. And I think we're seeing consolidation from some of these companies, but we're also seeing increased regulation, which of course you're talking about the fine today for 888, and
yes.
I think consolidation will probably come hand in hand with that, because it's going to become more expensive for these businesses to operate in light of bigger regulation costs.
Thank you. And finally, how did the markets close today?
FTSE's closed up 0.9% at 7431. The pound currently trading at 129 against the dollar and 108.5 against the euro.
Henrietta, thank you very much indeed. That was Henrietta Grimston from 7 Investment Management. Interesting, isn't it, that Ladbrokes' revenue from online gambling was up 18% over the course of the last year, and this is very much in line with what we've been discussing over the course of the last 40 minutes or so. Now, I'm going across to the US, and I'm going to go to Simon Marks, LBC's correspondent there, who I hope is going to give us an update on what's been happening in Texas, Louisiana, and elsewhere with this tropical storm. Simon, good evening.
Hello, Nigel.
So what's the news today, Simon?
Well, Vice President Mike Pence is down in Texas at the moment as a whole series of rescues continue. Even as the floodwaters are receding in some parts of the state, they are still rising in other parts of the state. And within the last couple of hours, we've seen on television here some very dramatic rescues in the city of Port Arthur in Texas. Large number of oil facilities in that immediate vicinity. People being winched to safety from their homes there. Similarly, in Port Aransas, also a number of dramatic rescues taking place. There are concerns about a chemical plant where some explosions took place in the early hours of the morning. They were not unexpected explosions, because the owner of the chemical plant had warned that because they had lost the ability to refrigerate some of the explosives that the plant stored and produced, that it was inevitable that there would be some spontaneous explosions. But there are obviously concerns about what this is going to do to that kind of infrastructure in the state, and Louisiana continuing to deal with an inundation of water there. And lest anybody thought that our eyes would soon be off the weather in that part of the country, there is another hurricane forming, Hurricane Irma, which looks set to do substantial damage over the course of the next few days in the Caribbean, and people in Miami are beginning to express concerns about that storm's track as well.
Right, well, none of that going away for a moment, and nor is the tit-for-tat war that's going on diplomatically between Russia and the US at the moment.
No, although I'm bound to say I'm not entirely sure that we are witnessing very much in the way of tit-for-tat here. We've all received a statement from the State Department within the last hour that is headlined, "Achieving Parity in Diplomatic Missions." You will remember that a few weeks ago, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered 755 American diplomats to leave Russia and their support staffs. That was retaliation for fresh sanctions that were imposed on Russia by the Congress of the United States and signed into law by President Donald Trump after several days of thought about whether he was actually going to sign them into law. We've waited for the American response to that expulsion of 755 Americans from Russia. It has now come in the form of the Russians being ordered by this weekend to close their consulate in San Francisco, to close a chancery annex here in Washington, D.C., and a consular annex in New York City. This statement says this is all about achieving parity in diplomatic missions, but it goes on to concede that it doesn't achieve parity, that there will still be disparity in the number of diplomatic and consular annexes that the United States is allowed to maintain in Russia versus the number that the Russians will be allowed to maintain here. And critically, Nigel, none of these Russian diplomats working in any of those 3 offices that are being closed, none of them is being thrown out of the country. They are all being told by the Trump administration they can go and find work in other Russian diplomatic offices around the country. So I think we're going to see some substantially negative reaction from the president's critics to this move, given that it doesn't, in fact, appear to be in any way.
So they'll say they'll say that he's too close to Russia, too soft to Russia, and all of that whilst this investigation is going on.
I think that's exactly where the criticism is going to go. And I mean, the headlines that the administration wants us to focus on, this is all an attempt over time to achieve parity, as this statement by the State Department spokeswoman puts it. This is an effort to arrest the downward spiral in the US-Russian relationship. That, she says, is why they're allowing the Russians to continue to maintain a larger diplomatic presence here than the Americans are being permitted to maintain in Russia. You know, if you turn the coin over the other side, you see that, in fact, 755 Americans have, according to the State Department, now left Russia. We have fully implemented the decision by the Russian government, says the State Department spokeswoman. We believe this action was unwarranted and detrimental to the overall relationship between our countries. But, as I say, not a single Russian diplomat is being thrown out of the United States.
No, well, the Russian story isn't going away, and Simon, from the sounds of it, the hurricanes and tropical storm story isn't either. Simon, thank you. That was Simon Marks, LBC's US correspondent, pointing out there is another hurricane, Hurricane Irma, there in the Caribbean, potentially threatening Miami this weekend, and that currently there's very heavy rain in Louisiana and parts of Texas, in the southeast of Texas, where things are still getting worse. So not a pretty picture at all. A death toll that is now in the high 30s, but I think we do expect that to rise as more evidence is unveiled. We were talking about gambling. We had our business news telling us that Ladbrokes are putting their dividend up because of an increase in online gambling. But are problem gamblers, is it the responsibility of the individual or of the gambling company that takes the money? I wonder what Mark in Harlow thinks of that. Mark, hello.
Nigel, what a pleasure to speak with you. I thought it would be about Brexit, but it's about this.
Okay.
It resonates very, very clearly, very real. So I told your producers that a year back I lost just over £160,000.
Wow.
I had swings in a day of my annual salary, you know, £25,000 per hour. That'd be won or lost in under 60 minutes at a time. And I just really want to send a powerful message to people that are in the same or currently in the same position that I was a year back. Stop using them. It starts with the fixed odds betting terminals in shops. Just take a step back, look at life for what it is, and this is what I've done. I've now got a 7-month-old little girl. She's priceless. It's not worth it.
What were you, Mark? What were you gambling on?
I'm a VIP member of 888. I'm also a VIP member of many of the other online chains and VIP member of the many casinos in London. It took over my life. I became deceitful. But it was roulette. To answer your question, it was roulette. European roulette.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I worked in the commodities business where trading was a part of our lives, but a lot of it was entirely legitimate. You know, people wanted to hedge their future requirements, or whatever it may be, but there was a big speculative element as well. And I must admit, there were times when I was, you know, market making, where, you know, I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning. All I could think about were, you know, where's the aluminium price going or the zinc price going? And trading, gambling can completely take over your life. Mark, are you now free of it completely?
Yeah, so look, I had counselling, and that was because the people and family around me, I had to come clean. I had counselling sessions, but it didn't do... It's you as an individual. You have to take full responsibility for your own actions. I knew full well, putting my 16-digit card number and 3-digit security code into that site with, a transaction of £5 grand, 10 grand, whatever it is. I knew what I was doing, and I knew what the end goal was. It was either going to be a big win, and I'd be very happy, or I'd lose it and go and sulk and go out for a big meal, and I've lost that, or what was a little bit more money going to do, sort of thing. So what I would say is that it starts at the very bottom, I believe, in the shops. I don't feel sick, but it makes me feel physically sick when I see, Ladbrokes, William Hill, all of those shops in the high street. It's just, it's only going to end in one way and in one scenario. It's sickening. I don't know.
Mark, I want to say thank you. Thank you. We've had other people in this hour that have called up that have had slight problems with gambling, but not your level of problem with gambling, and you've come very clean with us about it. You come very clean with your family about it. You've sorted it out. You've accepted it's your responsibility. And Mark, I thank you very much indeed for your call. Mark from Harlow there. An object lesson and a warning to everybody. And I'm a gambler. I love gambling. I'm going to go on gambling. I'm not a problem gambler. But a warning that some people, this can completely take over their lives. It's 6:45. For some people, gambling becomes a real problem. It takes over their lives. Indeed, it ruins their lives. And all this on the day when the online gambling firm 888 is forced to pay a record fine of £7.8 million for failing to protect their most vulnerable customers. And our last caller, Mark in Harlow, I thought described brilliantly how he'd got into punting, he'd opened up accounts everywhere with the online companies, the casinos in London, and he was having daily swings on his account, the equivalent to his annual salary, and he finishes up doing £160,000 in, and he's come clean with himself, his family, he's had counselling, he's sorted it, he's through it. And if there are other people listening to this who think, well, you know what, actually, I've got a bit of a problem, well, you can always get in touch with the GamCare helpline, and it provides confidential advice, information and emotional support all across the country for anyone experiencing problems with gambling. You can speak to an advisor on free phone, and it's 0808 8020 133, 8 a.m. to midnight, 7 days a week. And I'll make sure that number gets put up on the LBC website after this programme for anyone that wants to go to it that didn't have time because they're driving the car or whatever it may be to get that number down. Keith in Norwich, good evening. What do you know about gambling, Keith?
Good evening, Nigel. Thanks very much for taking my call.
Not a bit.
I don't know a lot about it. I'm not a gambler.
Right.
I've always taken the view that if there was a profit in it in the long term for the punter, then there wouldn't be such things as slot machines, gambling firms and bookies.
There is a certain rationality to that, Keith. There really is.
The point I'd like to make is if you look at football as a case in point, and if you look at the 25 years, if you like, of the Premiership, then it seems to me that what started off as the preserve of big beer brands in terms of money and sponsorship, and I'm sure any football fans out there can readily name half a dozen big beer brands that were involved in football in some form or another, whether it be at club level or whether it indeed be at sponsoring the league. It seems to me that those have slowly been replaced by gambling companies, and mostly online gambling companies. Now, you can argue that is perhaps because of our distaste towards alcohol over the last 25 years, and I say distaste, I mean our concern over advertising of it. We don't see much advertising of alcohol in the way that we used to. Or is it that the gambling companies are prepared to pay more for it because the internet and mobile phones have made it that much more accessible?
Well, it may well be. It may well be, Keith, that there is just more of it out there, and certainly there are more bookmaking shops on our high streets than there ever were, and there is a proliferation of online gambling. So perhaps it's a function that there's just more of it, and the more of it people see, the more tempted they are to actually do it.
So then, to answer the question that you posed, then maybe what we have to do is restrict the advertising of it in the way that we've restricted the advertising of tobacco and restricted the advertising of liquor, of alcohol. Because the more that you put it in front of people, the more that people then normalise it, and as opposed to 25 years ago, as I've already said, mobile phones and the internet make it incredibly easily to access.
And a few years ago, Formula One motor racing teams were being sponsored by individual tobacco companies, and there's been some big changes. But Keith, you're right. And by the way, it's not just football. If you watch the golf or the cricket or whatever you watch, online gambling companies advertising, it's there, it's everywhere. And I did sort of say earlier, Keith, that whilst I do believe ultimately, we can be tempted by things, but ultimately it is the responsibility in most cases of the individual to sort this out and not the company. I did wonder, Keith, whether, and perhaps you've looked at them, whether some of these adverts slightly give the impression you can get something for nothing.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, as someone who watches football a lot, you are just bombarded with advertising for online gambling, in-game betting.
No, you're right.
Endless.
You're right. Keith, thank you for your point. And my last caller this evening is Joel, who's calling from Southend. Joel, you're a first-time caller to LBC. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm well. So what's your experience with gambling, Joel?
Okay, Nigel, I dream more about gambling than you dream about Brexit.
Oh, good Lord, that's pretty serious, yeah.
How bad it is. That's how bad it is. I just wanted to make the point. I mean, Joe, I'm a recovering gambler, Hopefully you don't become a recovering Brexiteer, Nigel.
No, I'm sure I won't. Well done.
I just want to make this point, Nigel. With gambling, as opposed to drink and drugs and eating cookies, there's only so much of them you can do in a day. With gambling, you can do everything in a day.
Yes, and that's a fair point.
Therein lies the problem. And also, Nigel, you'll also find that gambling doesn't only affect the individual, it affects the children. It leads to self-harm in so many cases, house repossessions. And this, all in all, leads to public services and taxpayers' money for an extreme amount. Does that make sense, Nigel?
No, it does make sense, Joel. The question is that people do fall into this gambling trap, and I've seen it myself. But how do we stop it? I mean, surely trying to regulate the bookmakers isn't actually going to work, because there's so much online gambling out there, or even illegal gambling out there, that I'm not sure that really ultimately works. We can make sure the advertising is a bit more responsible. I mean, do you feel, Joel, as somebody who went down a bad route with this, do you feel there was enough advice out there for you?
No, nowhere near it. I mean, how I started, I used to be... Nigel, I was the bookie in school. That's where I started.
Okay.
Actually, where I started was, my first winner I backed when I was 11 years of age.
Yeah.
And maybe if I had a loser at 11 years of age, I would have saved.
Yeah. I remember, Joel, my son, he was 18. He went to his first point-to-point. He was at university in the West Country, and he went to a point-to-point, sort of winter's afternoon, and he came back. He said, Dad, it's easy. I had a couple of £10 bets. I got a couple of £100 in my pocket. I thought, oh, my goodness me, this is a disaster. I wish he'd lost money. Joel, do you ultimately think that your gambling problem was your fault, or that you were enticed into it by companies and online adverts?
No. My gambling problem was ultimately my fault.
Yes.
But it wasn't my children's fault, if that makes sense.
No. Joel, it does make sense. And you're right. Like a lot of other addictions, it can wreak absolute havoc and destruction, not just on the individual, but absolutely everybody around them. And thank you, Joel, for being brave enough, for coming on the phone and talking about it. I thank you. And... I'm not sure whether my feelings about Brexit can be actually linked to addiction. I perhaps have a couple of other addictions that I'm not particularly proud of, but hey, you know what? That's life. We've all got our issues. But gambling, it is a really interesting one. It is something that can completely take over people's lives. Goodness me, I've seen it. I'm back tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins, but leading Britain's conversation. Now, it's Clive Bull.